Welcome back to episode 5 of the 0 to 3k IO score challenge. In the last episode we had a few troubles with our routes and some comments that I want to take the advice of later on to hopefully improve our gameplay and UI slightly. We are super close to getting Keystone Hero, which is where we ended our series last season, which you guys can check out with the playlist in the top right hand corner. I'm pretty happy with the series so far, but trust me, it's going to get much more difficult from here. Before we start the video, I want to let you guys know about some exciting news. I've been wanting to stream WoW and other games for a while, so as long as my internet allows it, that is my plan. The plan is to hopefully be streaming once this video goes live on twitch.tv, so if you are seeing this the night it is posted, then be sure to come hang out for some vaults and keys. You can click the link in the description and drop a follow so you are notified whenever I do go live. Some of you might have noticed that there is now a join button next to my channel. This is my membership program. It's similar to a subscription on Twitch or a Patreon. Basically, you can choose 2 different price points to get perks or benefits while supporting me. So for the 2 tier choices, the first one is called New Guy. This costs $1 Canadian and will give you priority replies to any of your comments on my channel. The second tier is New Man, who will get some occasional photo and status updates, which could be behind the scenes, maybe some cool screenshots or milestones I've reached in WoW. Members of this tier will also get shoutouts at the end of every video for $5 Canadian a month. The prices will vary depending on your local currency, of course, and with all of that out of the way, if you do check out my Twitch or even decide to become a member of my channel, then I truly appreciate it more than I will ever be able to say, so thank you guys very much for the support. With all of that out of the way, it is time to open up our vault and get into another week of keys. Alright, it's time for another vault. I believe we have 2 Mythic Plus slots and 1 Heroic slot, but it's only going to be from like the first 3 bosses, so there's not too much that we could get that I would be excited about. Myth Track tier is always going to be good, since we don't have any of that yet. A Myth Track shield would be pretty good, and probably a ring. I think ring would be the biggest item level upgrade, so yeah. Well, there we go. There's some Myth Track shoulders. And my current tier shoulders are Veteran, which I believe are my worst tier piece. So that's a pretty big upgrade. There is a Myth Track ring, which I also wanted. Crit Mastery is okay stats, not BIS, not the worst. And then there's a Hero Track ring with Verse Crit, which, as far as I know, is definitely worse than the stats on this ring. As usual, I'm gonna run some sims. So yeah. Overall though, pretty lucky, I would say. So I'll come back to you guys when I'm done with the sims. Okay, so I think I'm gonna go with the shoulders. This is basically an upgrade in every way imaginable. This ring is good, but the stats are not the best, and because it's a ring, it's not giving me any strength. So that means if the stats aren't super good, it's probably not worth taking. It is less item level upgrade, so it hurts not to take it. But this shoulder is also 1 upgrade higher. And the nice thing about getting Myth Track gear is, I mentioned how I don't really have enough Worm's Crests, but that only applies to Hero Track gear. So this Myth Track gear, I can upgrade right away with Aspect Crest, which is super convenient, so yeah. And for our Keystone, we got a 21 Waycrest Manor, which I believe is actually our lowest key on Tyrannical Week. So if, and I mean if, we can get a good group and we can time it, that is going to be a huge score, so fingers crossed. We are capped on Flight Stones, so I want to spend some of them on some upgrades. This will include our Hero Track gloves, new Myth Track shoulders, myth track cloak, and our trinket. I tried to get into a heroic kill for Naimu, but it didn't go very well. We just wiped, so let's ignore that and do our first key, which was a 21 Ataldazar. The affixes this week are pretty bad for pushing, so I didn't do too many keys this week. Since it was Tyrannical week, the route I wanted to try was doing Razan first with Lust, and then going left all the way to the Priestess boss. This route can be more dangerous than the right on Fort Weeks, but if you have good kicks, it is significantly safer from my experience. I took your guys' advice and I got another weak aura that will track my consecrate that's separate from my normal paladin weak auras, but I decided that I would change the sound later on since it plays a sound when you leave consecrate or when you get an empowered proc, and after a while the sound got kind of annoying, so I changed it to something better. So if you hear any unusual sounds during this video, then now you know why. Our healer and DPS were doing really good throughput for this key. Luckily, bolstering doesn't really affect Ataldazar too much, and you can deal with lots of the afflicted by yourself as a prop ally. You can also get rid of the dot effect from the totem boss, which I haven't really heard anyone mention before, but it's one of those small tips that just helps out, and it's actually really satisfying when you can deal with it. We got the Bis shield from Mythic Plus that can drop at the end of the dungeon with speed. I believe this is equal or maybe slightly worse than our current shield when you sim it for damage, but the speed is pretty nice. Overall, Prot lacks mobility compared to almost every other tank, so speed is very welcome. A ring dropped and I asked if the other player needed it, so we got a new ring as well that has some alright stats that mainly have defensive value. We got 54 score from this key, which means we have reached Keystone Hero. This is our final big milestone before 3k IO score and where we ended our series last time. To be able to reach this significantly earlier than last time just shows how much I've improved playing with pugs and as a player, and the advantages that you can have if you choose to tank or even heal, since those roles are so much more desired than a DPS player. Next, we joined a plus 21 Darkheart Thicket. I'm not going to waste much time on this one. We were doing alright up until Oakheart. We had a few deaths to the first boss, but man, this boss is just brutal. I tried to outrange the breath, which you guys let me know as a tip in the comment, but I think I definitely need more practice at it because it wasn't working for me. I don't know if placing consecrate at your feet of the boss when you get grabbed makes you take the reduced damage, but for me, it just didn't seem like it. Anytime I would think that I'm safe and I can cheat a little bit and save a cooldown so that I can double up them and be extra safe for the next grab, it would inevitably kill me out of nowhere. Like, it feels like you have no time to react. So I think I'm gonna maybe do a little bit of research on this boss because I think this might be one of the hardest tyrannical bosses as a tank. And it's funny, like as a DPS player, this is one of the easiest bosses ever. It just absolutely destroys tanks. Although that key didn't go too well, I joined a plus 18 Throne of the Tides. This dungeon, on the other hand, is quite scary on bolstering. For example, in this first bowl, the two sentinels have a tank buster that stacks and makes you take more damage. So if these mobs get their damage buffed, it can be pretty scary and require additional CDs. Another scary mob is the Ravager, who is basically a mini boss and usually comes with a few smaller mobs that bolster. For Tyrannical, if everyone plays the mechanics well, then I think the third boss should be the hardest. The dot he applies can be hard to deal with, so it is something to look out for if you are a tank with utility that can help them stay alive. The rest of the bosses aren't too bad as long as everybody knows the mechanics and plays them properly. One of you mentioned in the comments that I can cleanse the stacks that I get or one of my party members get from the corruption ads before the last boss, which can allow your healer to focus on keeping the other 4 players alive. This key we only gained 6 score, but we did get a hero track helmet that I could catalyze. I am going to wait for my vault though, since at this point it's pretty late in the week and we've been getting lots of myth track tier recently. Our third key was a plus 21 Waycrest Manor. This one was really frustrating, and it wasn't even anyone's fault or even a mistake. Waycrest has a few pretty hard tyrannical bosses. The council boss went well, and as we made our way into the courtyard, we had our first problem. A disconnect, and my internet went out for a few minutes instead of letting me log right back in. Luckily, my group was very nice about it and said not to worry about it once I got logged back in. Once it was time for Soulbound Goliath, the thorns on this boss are really hard to deal with when you have an augmentation evoker, since they do such little damage. I tried my best, but we wiped. I tried to time the group AoE phase at a better time, and I was doing well in the next pull before yet another DC when we were about to kill it. So looking back, I could have used my bop, and I think that is a big thing that we haven't really had any super hard walls with Soulbound Goliath yet in this series, where using bop was basically the difference between a kill or a wipe. So that's definitely something I need to look out for next time, since these keys are getting pretty high for our gear and our DPS players' damage. So that's one thing I can improve on. Hindsight is great, but at this point I was beyond frustrated, and I really just felt bad for my group. We tried once more and finally killed it, but the rest of the key went well. We did deplete it, which is pretty frustrating since, to be honest, without the disconnects, there's no doubt that we would have timed it. Regardless, it sucks that it happened, but there's not much we can do. We got 52 score, and we joined up for a plus 18 Everbloom. I mentioned in a previous video that as a prop paladin, you can use Blessing of Freedom to remove the dangerous stacking debuff from the early packs of this dungeon. Some other tanks have different ways to deal with it, like Druid that can shapeshift, or Demon Hunter which can leap away and kite. I followed a route for this dungeon, but I think it was a bit over %, so hopefully I can tidy that up a bit better. There was a bit of confusion right before this pull. I saw somebody in chat say to do a big pull here, and to be honest, I kind of forgot what class our healer was, so I just kind of zoned out and thought it was our healer that said to do a bigger pull, and thought maybe they'll lust or maybe they have CDs, since I've never actually seen a DPS player tell a tank to do a big pull. But yeah, it was actually our rep paladin who was the leader. The mobs bolstered and we wiped, but it wasn't too big of a deal. We still had good damage. But regardless, obviously that's my fault. I just need to take a longer look at the chat and see who's sending messages. We got a 2 chest, and now that we are done our 4 plus 18s or above for the week, I wanted to do one more key to farm some Worm's Crests. I joined a plus 15 Dark Heart that will also let me practice some strategies for higher keys. Dodging the breath still needs more work, but I did get more practice on the 2 later bosses. Speaking of the last boss, we somehow wiped on it twice and depleted the key, so we barely got any Worm's Crests. It may have been because I was out DPSing 2 of our DPS players, but also just our defensive usage on the last boss when dealing with Feed the Weak and Nightmare Bolt were basically non-existent. Tyrannical Weak means that even in these lower keys to stay alive and keep your healer from falling behind, you need to be preparing for big incoming damage, so always be aware of that as a DPS player if you're trying to learn and improve to get into some higher keys. The final thing that I want to add to my UI before we end off this video was to update my player profile. I am not 100% sure if this profile that I found has all the features I want, which would likely be something to help me know when I don't have aggro, or maybe when I'm losing aggro. Another thing that I think could be useful is a way to tell distinct and dangerous mobs apart from each other, so that I can target them easier for Avenger's Shield or CC. But I will play with it for a bit and see if I like it or not, and I can always go back to my old profile if I don't like this one. If you want any of my add-ons or UI, then check out the video on my channel. This was the end of the week for me. We gained 147 score and were able to get Keystone Hero. Super happy with that. Thank you guys for watching another episode of the 0 to 3k Raider.io score challenge. Be sure to check out my Twitch and drop a follow, and I hope to see you all next time.